English football's second tier has been around for over a century, but was rebranded to the Coca-Cola Championship in the 2004-05 season. We're going to be starting from that season because for obvious reasons I am not doing the 100+ year history of the second tier. Also, the support on my last video was unbelievable and I really appreciate it, so thanks a lot. And as always, leave a like, subscribe for more English football content, and let's go. As I mentioned earlier, this was the first season of rebranding from it simply being known as the second division to the Championship. Winners were Sunderland, who finished on 94 points ahead of second place finishers Wigan on 85, with Ipswich finishing just 2 points behind them, and playoff winners were West Ham United. Crewe Alexandra were in the Championship during this time, which surprised me, and they managed to survive on goal difference ahead of Gillingham by a single goal. Other relegated teams were English football giants Nottingham Forest in 23rd and Rotherham in 24th. This season has now become pretty well known because of Reading, as they broke the record for the most points in Championship history with 106 points, a record which still stands today. They only lost 2 games and scored 99 goals, so just missed out on the elusive 100 points and 100 goals stat. But still, extremely impressive from Reading. Second place automatic spot went to Sheffield United, being back in the top flight for the first time in 12 years, and playoff winners were Watford, beating Leeds 3-0 in the final. A massive club like Leeds United will get promoted soon enough though. The fans shouldn't have much to worry about. Newly promoted Luton Town finished 10th in their first season up, with a guy called Stephen Howard scoring 14 goals for them. Relegated teams were Brighton, Millwall and Crewe Alexandra, who were unable to stay up again after surviving the season before by a single goal. I've got 3 words to say for this season. Doing a Leeds. Yep, Leeds United got relegated to League One because of overspending in the late 90s and early 2000s whilst they were in the Premier League, which then continued to impact the club when they were in the Championship. During this season, Leeds voluntarily entered administration, which caused them to pick up a 10 points deduction, and were then inevitably relegated to the third tier of English football, League One, after finishing 22nd. Other relegated teams were Southend United in 23rd, going straight back down, and Luton Town in 24th, who badly suffered from second season syndrome after their 10th place finish the season before. I'm sure we'll see them back soon enough though. Promoted to the Premier League was Sunderland in first, again, and Birmingham City in second, who also went straight back up. Playoff winners were Derby County. I wonder how they'll do in the Prem next season. This season was definitely one of the most closely contested that we have ever seen. Firstly, Hull City finished in third and won the playoffs, meaning they got promoted to the top flight of English football for the first time in their history. Not just the first time in the Premier League, their first time in the top flight ever. In second place was Stoke City, being promoted to the top flight for the first time in 23 years, and the winners were West Brom. The relegation fight this season went right down to the final day, with only 2 points separating 22nd and 18th. Leicester City got relegated in quite crazy fashion, as they conceded the second least amount of goals in the division with 45, a case of a strong defensive team just unable to score goals, scoring the least in the division with 42. Fun fact, there was a gap of only 29 points between first and 22nd place, so this was a very competitive season. Another decently close season this one, in terms of the automatic promotion race and the playoff race too. Wolverhampton Wanderers won the league with 90 points after having finished in the top half of the table for the past few seasons before, and were eventually able to go up. The battle for second place was very close however, as coming into the final day 3 teams were still in the race for a second automatic position. Birmingham were able to hold on with 3 points on the final day however, to go straight back up ahead of Sheffield United and Reading. In the playoffs, Cardiff threw away a place in the playoffs on the final day, after they lost and Preston won. The season finished with Preston in 6th and Cardiff in 7th. Both teams tied on points and goal difference, so the final playoff spot was determined by a single goal. Playoff winners were Burnley, ending a 33-year absence from the top flight. The teams going down to League One were Charlton in 24th, Southampton in 23rd and Norwich in 22nd. And Nottingham Forest are back by the way, they finished 19th. This was also the season of the infamous ghost goal scored by Reading when they faced Watford, with the game finishing 2-2. Quick shout out to Swansea, who finished 8th after getting promoted from League One, quite impressive. Newcastle United went on an absolute rampage this season after their relegation from the Premier League last season. They went with the strategy of holding on to their best players and investing strongly into the squad to get promoted straight away, and it worked. They won the league and broke the 100 points mark with 102 points, finishing 11 points ahead of second place West Brom. In other interesting news this season, Nottingham Forest jumped from 19th the season before to 3rd place this season and qualified for the playoffs. But you know who won the playoffs this season? Blackpool. A very close playoff final against Cardiff, which ended 3-2, meant it was the first time Blackpool had been in the top flight in 39 years. Also, Leicester finished 5th in their first season up, being knocked out in the semis by Cardiff. At the other end of the table, Championship regulars Sheffield Wednesday were relegated to League One, finishing in 22nd due to financial issues. Other relegated teams were Plymouth Argyle and Peterborough. And also Leeds United are still in League One, by the way.
Okay.
This season, Coca-Cola withdrew from their sponsorship, and energy company npower started sponsoring it at the start of the 2010-11 season. Norwich City became the first team in Championship history to do back-to-back promotions, finishing the season in 2nd with the most goals scored in the whole division with 84 under Paul Lambert. QPR won the league with 88 points, with Streets Will Never Forget player Adel Tarabt scoring 19 goals with 19 assists, who made QPR such a good team to watch at the time. Another recent League One team who went up through the playoffs was Swansea in their 3rd season back up in the Championship, beating Reading 4-2. Relegated teams were Preston in 22nd, Sheffield United and Scunthorpe, who had a pretty awful season, conceding 87 goals. Crazy to think about the fall of Scunthorpe over the next 12 years. Oh yeah, Leeds United are back, and they had a pretty good first season back, finishing just outside the playoffs in 7th. Fun fact, the highest scoring game of the season was Leeds 4, Preston 6, and the lowest attendance of the season was 4,190 when Scunthorpe lost 3-0 to Preston. It's happened again. Southampton have done the back-to-back promotions after Norwich did it the season before. A guy called Ricky Lambert scored 27 goals for Southampton and won the Golden Boot, being only 1 point behind champions Reading with 89, making a return to the Premier League after a 4-year absence. Only just missing out on the 2nd place were West Ham United, who finished 3rd on 86 points. They went on to win the playoffs, beating Blackpool 2-1 in the final. Leeds United were on the wrong end of a high-scoring game again, losing 3-7 at home to Nottingham Forest. At the other end of the table, recent Premier League side Portsmouth were relegated to League One in 22nd due to a 10-point deduction because of administration. Other relegated teams were Doncaster Rovers in 24th, conceding 80 goals, and Coventry in 23rd, who had been in the Championship for 9 years. Lots less Premier League regulars being promoted this year, with Cardiff City finishing 1st to get promoted to the top flight for the first time in 52 years. They had been hanging around the top half of the table during the season before and were able to achieve their target and won the Championship title quite comfortably, finishing 8 points ahead of 2nd place to confirm top flight football for only their 3rd time ever. Hull City finished joint with Stoke City for the least points achieved by 2nd place in Championship history, finishing 2nd on 79 points. In the playoffs this season, we had one of the most famous Championship playoff games, when Watford played Leicester City. Pretty much every football fan has seen this, but it's the 90th minute and both sides are drawing 2-2 on aggregate. Leicester get a penalty to win it, they miss it, then 20 seconds later, Watford scored to send them to the playoff final. Watford weren't able to win the final, however, as they lost 1-0 to Crystal Palace, who ended an 8-year absence in the Premier League, who had become bottom half Championship regulars before this season. Teams that were relegated were Bristol City, Wolves and Peterborough, who were relegated by 1 point behind Barnsley. This season was when the Championship was rebranded to the name which we all know today, the Sky Bet Championship. A very dominant season from winners Leicester City saw them win the league with 102 points, winning the 2nd division for the 7th time in their history, and we all know how they did in the Premier League. 2nd place with 93 points was Burnley, to end a 4-year drought from the top flight. QPR won the playoffs to return to the Premier League after a short absence. Quick mention to Bournemouth, who came 10th in their 1st season up from League One, so there's a big trend here of lots of promoted League One teams doing well in the Championship. In the relegation battle, Birmingham managed to survive on the final day on goal difference ahead of Doncaster Rovers. Needing just a point to survive, they came from 2-0 down against Bolton to draw 2-2 thanks to Paul Caddis' 93rd minute equaliser. Other relegated teams were Yeovil Town in 24th and Barnsley in 23rd. Bournemouth have won the Championship. Bournemouth. For the first time in their history, Bournemouth will be playing top flight football after winning the Championship title on 90 points and scoring 98 goals in the process under Eddie Howe. Just 5 years before, Bournemouth were in the 4th tier on the verge of being relegated from the Football League, so their rise up to the Premier League in the space of 5 years is really extraordinary. Following playoff final defeat 2 years before, Watford finished 2nd, just 1 point behind Bournemouth, with Troy Deeney, the man who scored the winner in the dramatic game against Leicester mentioned earlier, scoring 21 goals. Going straight back up to the Premier League were Norwich City, winning the playoffs after finishing 3rd, during which they beat rivals Ipswich 4-2 on aggregate. They then went on to beat Middlesbrough 2-0 in the final, Newly promoted Brentford finished 5th and qualified for the playoffs, but were knocked out in the semis. Wolves also had a good first season up, just missing out on the playoffs in 7th. Relegated teams were 2 recent Premier League sides in Blackpool and Wigan Athletic, and finishing 22nd were Millwall. Bouncing straight back up to the Premier League in first place on 93 points were Burnley, with Sean Dyche guiding them back up on a tight budget. 4 points behind them were Middlesbrough, ending a 7-year absence from the Premier League, who just managed to finish in second by goal difference ahead of Brighton. Speaking of Brighton, they're doing a really good job in the Championship after coming up from League One, and have been steadily climbing the table each season. They weren't able to win the playoffs, getting knocked out by Sheffield Wednesday in the semis. The winners of the playoffs were Hull City, making a return to the top flight, beating Sheffield Wednesday 1-0 in the final. After Bolton's relegation from the Premier League in 2012, each year since in the Championship, their league finishes worsened each year, and this season they came dead last, meaning they will be playing third tier football for the first time in 33 years. MK Dons and Charlton Athletic were also relegated. 2 Premier League giants would be playing in the Championship this year in Newcastle United and Aston Villa, but we also saw some underdogs do well this year too. Just like in the 2009-10 season, Newcastle United went for a similar strategy of holding on to their best players and investing strongly into the squad to go straight back up, and it absolutely worked, winning the Championship on 94 points. Finishing in second just 1 point behind them wasn't Aston Villa, but it was Brighton, ending a 34-year absence from top flight football, having been in the automatic spot for most of the season. We also had another Premier League new boy winning the playoffs on penalties against Reading in the form of Huddersfield Town, finishing 5th, surprisingly with a goal difference of -2. Unlike Newcastle, Aston Villa on the other hand had a shocker of a season, finishing 14th. And weren't able to replicate Newcastle's immediate return. Relegated teams were Rotherham, Wigan and Blackburn Rovers. Lots to talk about near the bottom of the table this year. Firstly, the main one being Sunderland, who had a back-to-back relegation and finished dead last to get relegated down to League One. It really was an abysmal season, which was well documented in Sunderland Till I Die, and they ended the season 6 points adrift from safety. Also, Bolton Wanderers staged one of the greatest final day survival stories in Championship history against Nottingham Forest. Needing a win to stay up, Bolton were 2-1 down, but scored 2 goals in the 80th minute to win 3-2, and just escaped relegation ahead of Barnsley and Burton. Winning the Championship on 99 points were Wolves under Nuno Santos, ending a 6-year absence from the Premier League, and in second place was Cardiff City. Aston Villa had an improvement this year, finishing 4th and qualifying for the playoffs, but lost in the final by 1-0 against Fulham. Topping the Championship table this year were Norwich City on 94 points to return to the Premier League, dominating the Championship under Daniel Farke and finishing 5 points ahead of Sheffield United, returning to the Premier League after 12 years. Aston Villa were finally able to return to the Premier League after 3 years, finishing 5th and beating Derby County in the playoff final. Championship regulars in Ipswich Town were relegated in 24th, only winning 5 games. This whole time since 2003, Ipswich have been hanging around mid-table with a few promotion pushes, but after 18 consecutive years in the second tier, Ipswich were relegated to League One. If you want to find out a bit more about the decline of Ipswich and how they made a return to the Championship, I made a video which is linked in the description. Also relegated were Bolton, who were unable to survive again after their miraculous escape the season before, and League One Championship yo-yo side Rotherham were relegated in 22nd. This year, a certain pandemic known as COVID-19 impacted the second half of the season. However, all games were played and it wasn't decided on a points per game basis like in League One. After many years of struggle in the Championship, Leeds United got back in the Premier League after a 16-year absence. Under Marcelo Bielsa, Leeds had been in the top 2 for most of the season and didn't drop below 5th during the whole season. West Brom returned to the Premier League in second after a few years away. Guess who won the playoffs again? Yep, that's right, Fulham, yo-yoing back up to the Premier League after finishing 4th and beating Brentford 2-1 in the final. After getting relegated from the Premier League the season before, Huddersfield had a very poor season back in the Championship, coming 18th and only finishing 3 points above the relegation zone. It was very tight this year near the bottom of the table, with there only being a 6-point difference between 24th and 18th. Coming last was Hull City, who had a big fall off after recently being in the Premier League. Other relegated teams were Wigan Athletic and Charlton Athletic. Norwich have done it again. Topping the Championship again were Norwich City with 97 points to yo-yo straight back up, clearly having the quality for the Championship, but just being unable to replicate that in the Premier League. Another team going straight back up were Watford in second, after a successful period in the top flight. Playoff winners were a new side in Brentford to get promoted to the Premier League for the first time, their first season back up in the top flight for the first time in 74 years. Barnsley had a brilliant first season back in the Championship after coming up from League One, as they finished 5th but were knocked out of the playoffs in the semis by Swansea. After Sheffield Wednesday spent big to get promoted to the Premier League, this didn't work and they suffered a 6-point deduction for breaching the league's sustainability rules. Wednesday went down in 24th. Other relegated teams were Rotherham in 23rd, obviously, and Wickham in 22nd. Fulham went straight back up again this year, this time not through the playoffs but by finishing first on 90 points, with Alexander Mitrovic scoring 43 goals, which is actually insane. Finishing second were Bournemouth to return to the Premier League after a 2-year absence. After 23 years, Nottingham Forest were back in the Premier League, beating Huddersfield 1-0 in the final. Barnsley suffered one of the worst second season syndromes in Championship history, finishing 24th after being 5th the season before. Other relegated teams were Championship giants Derby County, who were deducted a massive 21 points for entering administration, and Peterborough were in 22nd. Now we're up to the most recent season, with Burnley completely running away with the Championship and finishing on 101 points. A big rebuild by the club before the start of this season, getting rid of Sean Dyche and replacing him with Vincent Kompany, and it definitely paid off as they finished 10 points ahead of second and finished on an immense plus 52 goal difference. Second place was Sheffield United, making a return after a 2-year absence. The biggest news of the season was in the playoffs, where Luton beat Coventry on penalties in the final to get promoted to the Premier League. An unbelievable rise considering that they were in the National League, the 5th tier, just 9 years before. Sunderland made a return from League One this year, and in their first season back they finished 6th, being knocked out by Luton in the semis. Norwich dropped back down to the Championship this year, and they actually didn't go and win the league and finished 13th. Relegated teams were Wigan, Reading, who went down to the 3rd tier for the first time since 2002, and Blackpool. Making this video has actually made me age by about 10 years, so if you could help by leaving a like and subscribing, that would be greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.